Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Lily Winters never imagined the day would come when her control would snap so violently, but the fiery moment erupted at the Grand Phoenix as if every hidden scar, every betrayal, every memory of deception from the past had suddenly come surging out of her veins in one unstoppable torrent. Phyllis Summers, always smug with her sly little smirk and red-hot temper masked by self-righteous indignation, had pushed Lily's patience far past the breaking point. What began as a casual confrontation over Kane Ashby's newest wave of manipulations escalated in seconds into an all-out emotional explosion that sent everyone in the lobby turning their heads in shock, gasping at the scene. Lily stood stiff and trembling, her eyes darkened with a storm of rage and heartbreak, when suddenly her hand cut through the air like lightning and landed across Phyllis's face with a sharp, echoing crack that reverberated through the entire hotel. The slap wasn't just a reaction, it was a declaration, a promise, a signal that Lily was done playing polite games, done sitting back while Phyllis and Kane maneuvered in shadows. The sting across Phyllis's cheek was nothing compared to the sting of Lily's words that followed, words that would forever change the balance of power in Genoa City. "I'm going to expose Kane's plot," Lily seethed, her voice low but deadly, her chest rising and falling as the weight of years of betrayal poured out of her. "Every lie, every secret, every twisted scheme he's been running behind all of us, I'm dragging it out into the light, and I don't care who gets burned in the process. You've protected him, you've schemed with him, you've twisted this city to his advantage, but not anymore. Not on my watch." The stunned silence that followed was thicker than glass, even those loyal to Kane could feel the tremor of truth behind Lily's fury. Phyllis blinked, clutching her cheek, her trademark bravado flickering for just a second, betraying a rare glimpse of fear. She knew Lily's words weren't empty. This was a woman who had lost, endured, survived, and risen from the ashes before, and now she was about to burn Kane Ashby's empire to the ground, dragging Phyllis down with him if necessary. As Lily spoke, the memories of Kane's past wrongdoings rushed through her mind, the falsified documents, the twisted identity games, the con artist tricks that nearly tore her life apart, the stolen moments that could never be recovered. Each one was like a match tossed into a pile of gasoline-soaked wood, fueling her rage until she could no longer be silenced. She remembered his lies about Philip Chancellor, his manipulation of her trust, his vanishing acts that left her children fatherless and her heart shattered. And now, with whispers circulating that Kane had once again entangled himself in schemes so dark they reached into Newman Enterprises, Chancellor Winters, and even Victor Newman's iron grasp, Lily knew that this was the time to strike. Phyllis, always a master manipulator herself, tried to regain her footing, her voice quivering with a cocktail of outrage and desperation. "You don't know what you're talking about, Lily. Kane isn't," but Lily cut her off with a glare so sharp it could cut steel. Don't you dare defend him. Not again. I've lived this nightmare, Phyllis, I've had my life destroyed by his lies, and I'll be damned if I let him do it again to me, to my family, to Genoa City. You think you can cover for him, you think you can hide his secrets, but the truth has a way of clawing its way out. And I'm going to be the one who drags it, kicking and screaming, into the daylight." Phyllis's attempt to recover dissolved under the weight of Lily's conviction. The slap, the words, the fire in Lily's eyes, they weren't just an outburst. They were a manifesto. Around them, whispers began to ripple as hotel guests and business partners pulled out their phones, recording the clash, knowing full well that this moment was history in the making. Lily's declaration wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a war cry that promised the exposure of secrets that could topple the delicate balance of power among the Abbotts, the Newmans, and every family connected to Kane's shadow games. As Phyllis backed away, her mind raced. Should she retaliate, should she warn Kane, or should she finally betray him before he dragged her down into his downfall? But Lily, her hand still trembling from the sting of the slap, didn't wait for Phyllis's response. She turned toward the crowd, her voice rising with the strength of a woman who had decided once and for all to stop living as a victim. "Everyone deserves to know the truth about Kane Ashby," she declared. "And I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, no matter how many people try to silence me. The moment was seismic, shaking every alliance, every fragile truce, every secret that had been buried beneath layers of lies. For Lily, the slap wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a firestorm that would leave Genoa City scorched, fractured, and forever changed. Lily's pulse was racing, but she refused to let her emotions falter as she stood in the middle of the Grand Phoenix lobby, her voice cutting like steel against the velvet air, the echo of that slap still reverberating as if time itself had slowed down to replay the moment again and again, reminding everyone present that this was not simply a personal feud between two women, but the eruption of a long-brewing volcano that threatened to consume entire families and corporations in its fiery destruction. Her mind was ablaze with memories, scars carved into her soul by Kane's endless betrayals, the nights she spent pacing the floor waiting for him to come home, the whispers of his so-called business trips that were nothing but fronts for deception, the forged documents that shattered her trust, the humiliation of discovering his double life with Samantha, and the relentless sting of finding out, again and again, that the man she had once vowed to love was built out of shadows and half-truths. And though part of her had always clung to the hope that Kane would someday rise from the swamp of his cons and lies, tonight something inside her snapped, the scales finally tipping as she realized that every minute she kept quiet was another minute Kane's plot grew, another minute of damage being inflicted on those she cared about, another minute stolen from the possibility of peace. And so the slap across Phyllis's face wasn't just punishment for siding with Kane, it was the exclamation mark on Lily's awakening, the moment she shed whatever fear, guilt, or hesitation had been holding her back and decided that if she had to burn Kane's empire to the ground herself, she would do it with both hands, with her head held high, no matter how messy or dangerous the fallout might be, because nothing, no love, no shared history, no loyalty, could justify the scale of darkness he was dragging across Genoa City. Phyllis, clutching her cheek and trying to mask the sting with that familiar veneer of bravado, could feel the eyes of every witness piercing into her like knives, their judgment searing into her carefully constructed facade, and in that moment she realized with a jolt of dread that Lily's words were more than fury, they were truth, and Phyllis hated nothing more than standing on the wrong side of truth, especially when it came packaged in Lily Winters's unwavering determination. For Lily had always been underestimated, written off as too forgiving, too composed, too moral for the games that ran this town, but tonight that perception was obliterated as she stood like a warrior in front of them all, her hands still trembling from the sting of the strike but her spirit ironclad in resolve, her glare promising retribution against both Kane and anyone who dared protect him. Whispers circled the room as business moguls, reporters, and curious bystanders muttered in low tones, phones lifted discreetly to capture the showdown, knowing this footage would be worth its weight in gold once the truth unraveled in public, and Phyllis, normally the one orchestrating such theatrics, felt her control slipping like sand through her fingers, torn between the instinct to lash out and the dawning realization that Lily's fury had planted a seed in everyone's mind, a suspicion that perhaps Kane Ashby's charm had always been a mask for a predator's cunning. Lily could almost hear the gears turning in the heads of those watching, could almost taste the shift in the air as doubt about Kane began to sprout in conversations that would ripple through Chancellor Winters, Newman Enterprises, even Jabot, because Kane's reach, his scams, his blackmail, his whispered promises, stretched into every corner of Genoa City, and the exposure Lily promised would not just topple him but unravel a spiderweb that connected too many powerful names, too many buried secrets, but that was exactly why she had to do it. Why her declaration carried the weight of inevitability, because silence had allowed Kane to thrive for too long, and if she let Phyllis's schemes continue to provide cover, more innocent people, her children, Devon, Nate, even Billy, would be collateral damage in Kane's endless game of survival. Phyllis, regaining her voice, tried to strike back with words, her tone sharp, brittle, desperate, insisting that Lily was blinded by old wounds, that Kane had changed, that digging into the past would only rip apart families who had already suffered, but Lily's eyes blazed with fury as she snapped back, families have already been ripped apart, Phyllis, by him, by you, by the lies you both weave like silk, and I refuse to let another generation live in the shadow of that poison, her voice cracking not from weakness but from raw truth, because as much as she hated admitting it, part of her anguish came not from anger at Kane alone but from the echo of her own misplaced loyalty. the years she had defended him against all logic, the times she had silenced her doubts in the name of love, the sacrifices she made to keep her family intact while he chipped away at its foundation, and now the fire in her chest was fueled not just by betrayal but by regret that she had allowed him to go unchecked for so long. She would not, could not, allow that mistake again, and the more Phyllis protested, the more Lily felt the world aligning behind her resolve, the more she knew that exposing Kane wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a duty, a cleansing act, a chance to rip out the roots of rot before they spread even deeper into the soil of Genoa City. Yet even as Lily stood defiant, Kane himself lurked in the shadows of her mind, likely already scheming, already calculating how to spin the slap, the confrontation, the declaration, into some narrative that would once again paint him as the misunderstood victim, for that was Kane's greatest weapon, his ability to twist stories, to play both hero and victim depending on the audience, to charm his way back into circles that should have cast him out years ago. But Lily vowed that this time his charm would not save him, his smile would not soften hearts, his half-apologies would not buy him forgiveness, because she would be standing there at every turn, tearing down his excuses, holding up the evidence, demanding that the truth be seen for what it was. And though Phyllis tried to warn her that exposing Kane would unravel not just him but secrets others were desperate to keep hidden, Lily's voice thundered over her, stronger than the fear, sharper than the pain. Let it unravel then. Let every lie fall apart. I'd rather live in the rubble of truth than in the palace of lies you two have built. And with that final strike, the air around them quaked with a new sense of inevitability, a storm gathering on the horizon, because everyone knew Lily Winters was not bluffing, not posturing, not playing games. She was promising war, and war was coming. And as the shockwaves of that moment rolled through the lobby, Lily's eyes flickered with a mixture of grief and fury, because while she stood in strength before Phyllis and every bystander who dared to watch, inside she was grappling with the jagged edges of her past, those invisible scars Kane had etched into her life with every betrayal, every manipulation, every carefully constructed lie that had left her questioning her own worth, her own instincts, her own ability to trust. And it was that raw history that made her slap so much more than physical, because when her hand connected with Phyllis's cheek, she wasn't just punishing Phyllis for siding with Kane, she was exorcising years of silence, years of swallowing pain to keep the peace, years of pretending that Kane's schemes were tolerable, forgivable, survivable. Now, as the sting lingered on Phyllis's face and the tremor of Lily's words hung thick in the air, a quiet but undeniable shift began to ripple through the very heart of Genoa City, because those who once dismissed Lily as too forgiving, too composed, too restrained suddenly saw a woman aflame, a woman who had reached her limit and was prepared to tear down empires to reclaim her sense of truth, justice, and power. And that revelation sent chills through Phyllis, who had long thought she could outmaneuver anyone, talk her way out of anything, twist narratives until she stood triumphant. But now she realized with a sickening thud that Lily's conviction was unlike any storm she had weathered before, because Lily wasn't fueled by ego or opportunism like so many in this town. She was fueled by lived pain, righteous fury, and the unshakable knowledge that she had been wrong too many times to ever let it happen again. And though Phyllis opened her mouth to argue, to counterattack with venomous words that might restore her balance, the room itself betrayed her, the crowd's whispers slicing into her confidence like blades, the spectators shifting uneasily as though they too recognized the tectonic shift taking place, because Lily Winters declaring war on Kane Ashby wasn't just another spat, it was a tremor that promised an earthquake. And in Genoa City, earthquakes never ended with just one casualty. Lily, standing taller with every breath, felt the weight of history pressing against her, her father Neil's battles with secrets and lies, her brother Devon's struggles with betrayal, her own mistakes and losses, and it crystallized inside her that exposing Kane wasn't just about retribution, it was about honoring the truth her family had always fought for, about protecting her children from the poisonous cycles that Kane embodied, about refusing to let another generation drown in the same swamp of deception. And so when she turned back to Phyllis and said through clenched teeth, "You've hidden his sins for the last time," the words carried the weight of legacy, of blood, of an entire lineage demanding justice through her. And yet, even as she steeled herself, Lily knew the battle ahead would not be simple, for Kane was no ordinary liar, he was a master manipulator, a man who had built his entire existence on weaving lies into believable tales, a man who had worn so many masks he barely remembered the face beneath them, and the danger of going after him was that he would strike back with every weapon at his disposal: charm, blackmail, deceit, alliances forged in shadows. And standing beside him, whether she admitted it or not, was Phyllis, who thrived in chaos, who loved nothing more than to turn the tables in the 11th hour and emerge victorious when everyone else thought she was cornered. But Lily no longer cared about their tricks, because what she carried wasn't a strategy, it was fire, pure and unrelenting, the kind of fire that consumed lies no matter how intricately they were spun. And as she felt that fire pulse through her veins, she made a silent vow that she would not rest until Kane's plot was revealed in its entirety, no matter how many reputations it destroyed, no matter how much blood spilled onto the floor of Genoa City's already fractured social fabric. Phyllis, for her part, felt her defenses weakening in ways she never had before, because normally when confronted she could find a crack in her opponent's armor, some hesitation, some fear, some leverage to exploit, but Lily gave her nothing but unwavering defiance, and that terrified her more than she wanted to admit, because a woman who had nothing left to lose was dangerous, but a woman who had already lost everything and risen stronger was unstoppable, and Lily Winters was now the embodiment of unstoppable. The slap had already gone viral, clips spreading like wildfire through social media, sparking hashtags and debates about what had truly happened, with some defending Phyllis as a victim of Lily's outburst while others praised Lily for finally standing up against years of deception. But regardless of which side people chose, the narrative was shifting, and Kane's name was now tied to suspicion, scandal, and the promise of exposure, which meant his days of skating by on charm and fabricated innocence were numbered, and in that knowledge Lily found her first taste of vindication, a small but potent reminder that even before she had revealed the full scope of his plot, the tide was turning. The walls were closing in, and Kane Ashby would soon find himself cornered in a way he had never been before. Still, Lily knew this was only the beginning, because while the slap had started the fire, she would need to stoke it with evidence, testimonies, and revelations so damning that not even Kane's most loyal defenders could deny the truth. And though that path promised danger, retaliation from Kane, sabotage from Phyllis, even warnings from allies who feared what collateral damage might be unleashed, Lily embraced it, because after years of playing the dutiful wife, the forgiving ex, the quiet professional, she had finally stepped into the role destiny demanded of her, the avenger, the truth-teller, the one who would not only tear down Kane's empire but cleanse the entire city of the rot that had allowed men like him to thrive unchecked. And as she stood in that lobby, surrounded by whispers, recording phones, and the stunned silence of those too afraid to intervene, she let the moment solidify into a declaration that would echo far beyond this night, knowing full well that the storm she had unleashed could not be contained, and that for Kane, Phyllis, and anyone else tangled in their lies, the reckoning was already on its way. But even as the adrenaline coursed through Lily's veins and the echo of her words seemed to vibrate through the air like thunder refusing to fade, she knew that the consequences of what she had done were already beginning to take root, spreading outward like ripples in a poisoned pond. Phyllis, standing in stunned silence, could barely process the humiliation burning beneath her skin, the sting of Lily's slap now a physical reminder that her alliance with Kane had reached its expiration point. That the house of cards they had been constructing together was about to collapse in spectacular fashion, and though her pride screamed for her to retaliate, to throw her own verbal daggers, something inside her hesitated, because even Phyllis, in her sharpest, most manipulative moments, could sense when the game was shifting beyond her control, when the opponent had tapped into a force that couldn't be reasoned or bargained with, and Lily's determination now felt like destiny itself, the kind of unstoppable truth that even the best liars couldn't rewrite. The crowd around them remained frozen, suspended in a tense mixture of awe and unease, and Lily could feel their eyes tracking her every movement as she turned away from Phyllis, her mind already racing ahead to what came next, to how she would begin dismantling Kane's plot piece by piece, because this wasn't going to be a matter of gossip or accusations, it was going to be a systematic exposure, a dismantling of everything he had built from deceit. She would go to Devon, to Jill, to Victor if she had to. She would pull in anyone who had ever been deceived by Kane's charm, and she would make them see what she saw, a man who had mastered the art of pretending to be the victim while orchestrating chaos behind closed doors, a man who could weep on cue while pocketing the very thing he claimed to have lost, and though confronting that truth would devastate the city, Lily was beyond caring, because truth, no matter how cruel, was always better than the rod of illusion. Her heart ached as she thought of her children, of how many times they had been forced to navigate the wreckage of their father's choices, and a wave of guilt passed through her, not for slapping Phyllis, not for declaring war, but for all the times she had stayed silent, convincing herself she was protecting them by keeping the peace when in reality she was only teaching them to accept deceit as normal. And that thought hardened her even further, igniting a new layer of resolve that made her spine straighten and her voice sharpen as she called out to Phyllis one last time, "You think this ends here? It doesn't. It's only beginning."